No one expected a maid to stand up to a billionaire, but she came back after 9 months with a shocking revelation. This baby is yours, and I've never been with another man. If you love stories of love and romance, watch until the end, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. Stay tuned, for rain lashed against the 48th floor windows with a violence that seemed to want to shatter, not just the glass, but the entire solidity of that empire of steel and concrete that Vincent Del Valle had built upon the ashes of his own humanity. He watched the storm from his office, his hands clasped behind his back, his impeccable Italian suit uncreased even at 2 in the morning, when New York City slept and he remained awake as always, as if sleep were a weakness he could not afford. Vincent Del Valle hadn't truly slept in 17 years, not the deep restorative sleep that came with peace of mind. He dozed 3-4 hours a night, always alert, always ready for the next attack, the next betrayal, the next abandonment, because abandonment was what he knew best. Abandonment was the language he had learned at 7 years old. When he woke up one morning, and his mother was simply no longer there. What remained of her were fragments, the scent of jasmine he sometimes caught in elevators, the sound of a woman's laughter that made him turn his head in restaurants, the memory of delicate fingers running through his hair before sleep. But that was before she decided he wasn't enough to stay. Before she chose freedom over her son. His father, Richard Del Valle, never spoke of the matter, never explained, never consoled. He just said with the coldness that characterized all the men in the family, Del Valle men don't cry. Del Valle men build empires. And Vincent had built. God, how he had built. The Del Valle Corporation was more than a company. It was an economic war machine that crushed competitors and turned dreams into numbers on spreadsheets. Vincent commanded everything with surgical precision, never allowing emotions to interfere with decisions. He had learned at 15, when he tried to rebel against his father and was sent to a boarding school in Switzerland, that feelings were luxuries that cost too much. Now at 43, he was exactly what the world expected him to be: ruthless, brilliant, immensely wealthy, and completely empty inside. His relationships with women were business transactions disguised as intimate encounters. He paid. They pretended to desire. Everyone knew the rules. No one got hurt. It was simple, predictable, safe. But that night, as the storm raged outside, something inside Vincent's chest seemed to echo the roar of thunder. He had spent the entire afternoon rereading letters he had accidentally found in his father's personal archives, his father having died 3 years prior. Letters his mother had written to him, letters that never reached his hands, letters that spoke of longing, of regret, of love, letters that revealed a different truth from the one he had carried for decades. She hadn't abandoned him. She had been cast out. Vincent closed his eyes and pressed the palms of his hands against his temples. The migraine that had tormented him for days seemed to want to split his skull. He needed to get out of there, go home, take a cold shower, drink whiskey until he fell asleep. But first he needed to finish reviewing the contracts for the next morning's meeting. 3 floors below, Aurora Menzies pushed her cleaning cart down the silent corridor, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished marble. She liked the night shift. There was peace in those empty corridors, a solitude that didn't weigh on her shoulders, like the loneliness of her personal life. Here she could work in silence, lost in thought, without needing to feign smiles or answer questions about her life. Aurora had arrived in New York City 6 months ago, carrying only a small suitcase and the address of a cheap boarding house downtown. She came from the countryside, from a small town in the Appalachian Mountains where she had grown up with her grandmother, a strong woman who taught her that dignity was priceless and that honest work, however humble, was worth more than any handout. Clarice had died the previous winter, leaving Aurora completely alone in the world. Her mother had abandoned her when she was only 3 years old, leaving one morning without explanation, without goodbyes, leaving only a note saying she wasn't born to be a mother. Aurora grew up hearing neighbors whisper about the woman who had the courage to abandon her own daughter, as if it were an act of bravery and not cowardice, but her grandmother never spoke ill of her daughter in front of Aurora. Clarice simply said, "Your mother did what she could, child. Not every woman is born knowing how to love, but you will know. You will be different." And Aurora grew up believing this, nurturing a silent hope that one day she would be truly loved, that one day someone would choose to stay. The associate's degree in business administration, hanging on the wall of her tiny room in the boarding house, was a constant reminder of dreams that had to be postponed. She had tried a few interviews when she arrived in the city, but the reality was cruel. Without experience, without contacts, without the right surname, doors remained closed. The night cleaning position at the Del Valle Corporation had been a godsend, even if the salary barely covered her basic expenses. Aurora wasn't ashamed of the work. She cleaned every office, every bathroom, every corridor, with the same care she would dedicate to a work of art. There was pride in doing well, in being reliable, in going unnoticed, but never being negligent. The executives who sometimes worked late greeted her with distant cordiality, and she responded with discreet politeness. It was a social dance whose steps everyone knew. But that night, as Aurora cleaned the 45th floor offices, something in the air felt different. The storm had intensified, and thunder echoed through the building like warnings from an angry god. She had noticed the lights flickering occasionally, a sign that the power grid was overloaded. She needed to finish her work quickly and go home before the situation worsened. That's when she decided to go up to the 48th floor to collect the trash from the executive offices. Normally, she left this task for last, but something urged her to finish everything quickly that night. Perhaps it was intuition. Perhaps it was just a hurry to escape the storm that seemed to want to swallow the entire city. The elevator ascended slowly, and Aurora watched the numbers change on the digital panel. 45, 46, 47, that's when everything went dark. The blackout was sudden, complete, absolute. The elevator stopped between the 47th and 48th floors with a jolt that made Aurora cling to the handrails. For a moment, the silence was total, broken only by the sound of rain lashing against the building's windows. Then the emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in a reddish gloom. Aurora took a deep breath, trying to control the panic that was beginning to form in her chest. She had always had claustrophobia, a legacy from the days she hid in the closet when she heard her grandmother crying after receiving letters from her daughter who never returned. She pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. The system was completely dead. It was then that she heard voices coming from above. Someone was on the 48th floor. Someone was trapped just like her. Vincent noticed the blackout at the exact moment he signed the last contract. The pen stopped in the middle of his name. The lights went out, and he found himself plunged into a darkness that seemed to echo the darkness of his soul. For a moment, he remained motionless, as if waiting for the light to return by the force of his will. But when the emergency lights came on, painting his office blood red, he understood he was trapped. He walked to the window and observed the city. All of New York City had plunged into darkness. Only a few hospital and hotel generators created sparse points of light in the black immensity. It was as if the world had ended and he was the last survivor in his ivory tower. That's when he heard the noise, something like metal scraping against metal coming from the corridor. Vincent frowned. There shouldn't be anyone in the building at that hour, except perhaps a few security guards on the ground floor. He walked to his office door and opened it. The red emergency light cast strange shadows in the corridor, transforming the familiar environment into something almost supernatural. And that's when he saw her. A young woman was kneeling beside the elevator door, trying to force it open with some metallic object. She had taken off her shoe and was using it as a lever, trying to create a gap through which she could slip her fingers. Her dark hair fell over her face, hiding her features, but there was something in her posture, in her movements, that was both fragile and determined. "Is everything all right?" Vincent's voice cut through the silence, making the woman jump. Aurora looked up and found herself facing the most handsome man she had ever seen. Even in the reddish gloom, she could distinguish his aristocratic features, his imposing height, the natural elegance that emanated from his every movement. She recognized him immediately, Vincent Del Valle, the owner of the company himself, the man whose name was engraved on golden plaques throughout the building. I was in the elevator when the power went out," she stammered, trying to stand with dignity despite the embarrassing situation. "I'm trying to open the door to go down the emergency stairs." Vincent watched her for a moment that seemed eternal. She was small, delicate, but there was strength in her dark eyes. She wore the company's cleaning uniform, and he realized she was one of the night shift employees. But there was something about her that intrigued him, something he couldn't quite name. "The emergency. Stairs are locked," he said, approaching. "The security system locks all exits during blackouts to prevent intrusions. We need to wait for the power to come back on, or for someone to rescue us." Aurora felt her heart quicken. His proximity was unsettling, not only because of the abyssal social difference that separated them, but because of the intensity of his presence. He radiated power and control, but there was something in his eyes that seemed lost, as if behind all that security existed a boy who still cried for his mother. "For how long?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent looked out the window, observing the storm that showed no signs of abating. "It could be hours. This is the worst storm of the year. Half the city must be without power." The silence that followed was laden with tension. Two completely opposite worlds, two people who should never be in the same space, trapped by the force of nature in a situation neither of them had planned. "I can wait in my office," Vincent finally said. "It's more comfortable than the corridor." Aurora hesitated. Entering the office of the most powerful man in the company seemed to cross an invisible line that shouldn't be crossed. But the alternative was to stay in the cold corridor, and she could feel the emergency air conditioning, creating a cold draft that made her skin prickle. "Thank you," she murmured, following him. Vincent's office was exactly what she expected, immense, luxurious, with a panoramic view of the city that night looked more like a black abyss dotted with rare points of light. The desk was larger than her entire boarding house room, and the shelves filled with books and awards told the story of a man who had conquered everything money could buy. Vincent gestured toward the leather sofa. "Make yourself comfortable. Would you like water? Coffee? I have a battery-operated machine." "Water, please." Aurora sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, trying to occupy the smallest possible space. He brought a crystal glass filled with ice water and sat in the armchair opposite her, maintaining a respectful distance. In the red emergency light, their faces looked like theatrical masks, expressions exaggerated by the dramatic lighting. "What's your name?" Vincent asked, genuinely curious. "Aurora. Aurora Menzies." "Aurora." He repeated the name as if savoring a rare wine. "Beautiful name. It means dawn, doesn't it?" She nodded, surprised he knew. "My grandmother chose it. She said I was the light that came to brighten her days." There was sadness in Aurora's voice when she spoke of her grandmother, a melancholy Vincent recognized because it was similar to what he felt when he thought of his mother. Two people, who had lost those they loved most, sitting in an office at the top of a skyscraper, trapped by the storm and by circumstances. "Did you lose your grandmother recently?" he asked, with a kindness that surprised him. "Last winter she raised me. She was all I had." Aurora took a sip of water, trying to disguise the emotion that threatened to spill over. "And you? Do you have family?" The question caught Vincent off guard. No one had asked him about family in years. In the corporate world, everyone knew he was single, childless, heir to an empire built on loneliness and ambition. But there was something in the way Aurora asked, without malice, without hidden interest, just genuine human curiosity, that disarmed him. "My mother left me when I was a child," he said, the words coming out before he could censor them. "My father died 3 years ago. I have no siblings. I'm alone, like you." Aurora looked at him with an understanding that was like a punch to the gut. There was no pity in her eyes, nor the embarrassment people normally showed when he mentioned his mother. There was just recognition, as if she understood exactly what it meant to be left behind by someone who should love unconditionally. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said softly. "How we keep hoping they'll come back, even knowing they won't." Vincent felt something stir within his chest, something he had carefully kept buried for decades. "Do you still hope?" "Every day." The confession came out as a whisper. "When I hear footsteps in the boarding house where I live, when the phone rings, when someone knocks on the door, for a second I always think it might be her. It's pathetic, I know." "It's not pathetic." Vincent's voice was hoarser. "I do the same thing. Even knowing she's been dead for 15 years, sometimes I still look at women on the street and wonder if it could be her, if she would have aged that way, if she would smile like that." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It wasn't embarrassment or tension, it was mutual understanding, two wounded souls recognizing each other's scars. Outside, the storm continued its symphony of destruction, but inside that office, something delicate and precious was being born. Vincent stood up and walked to the window. "Sometimes I wonder if she thought of me," he said, the words directed more at the glass than at Aurora. If she looked at children on the street and remembered the son she left behind, if she felt remorse, or if it was easy to forget. Aurora approached him, stopping at a distance that was respectful, but close enough for him to feel her presence. "I'm sure she thought of you. Mothers always think, they just sometimes don't know how to come back." He turned to face her. In the red light, she looked like an apparition, a minor goddess sent to torment him with truths he had spent his life trying to avoid. "How can you be so sure?" "Because if my mother didn't think of me, it would mean I never mattered, and that would be unbearable." She touched the glass with her fingertips, as if trying to reach something on the other side. "It's easier to believe she thinks of me and doesn't have the courage to come back than to accept that I never meant anything." Vincent observed those small fingers against the glass and felt an inexplicable desire to cover them with his own. There was a vulnerability in Aurora's posture that echoed his own vulnerability, a wound that perfectly mirrored his own wound. "I found letters from her earlier today," he said impulsively. "Letters my father hid from me for over 30 years. She didn't abandon me, Aurora. She was cast out." Aurora turned to him, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" Vincent returned to his desk and picked up one of the letters, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded it. "She tried to take me with her when she left, but my father had money, lawyers, power. He got a court order preventing her from approaching. She wrote to me for years, apologizing, explaining she had no choice. I never knew." The pain in his voice was palpable, decades of anger and abandonment being rewritten in real time. Aurora felt tears burn her eyes, not for her own sorrow but for his. "Vincent." She said his name for the first time, tasting how it sounded on her tongue. "I'm so sorry." He looked up at her, and Aurora saw something that probably no one else had ever seen. Vincent Del Valle crying. Not dramatic sobs, but silent tears that streamed down his face as if finding their way after years of being dammed up. Without thinking of the consequences, without considering the differences between them, Aurora approached and gently touched his face, drying a tear with her thumb. The gesture was so natural, so instinctive, that neither of them stopped to question it. Vincent closed his eyes as he felt her touch. When was the last time someone had touched him with tenderness? When was the last time someone had consoled him without wanting something in return? He covered her hand with his, keeping it against his face as if she were an anchor in an ocean of pain. "I don't know what to do with this information," he whispered. "I spent my whole life hating her, blaming her, and now—" "And now you can forgive her," Aurora completed, "and perhaps forgive yourself too." He opened his eyes and found her so close that he could feel the warmth of her breath. There was something magnetic in that moment, a force that seemed to pull them toward each other, like two pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their fit. "Aurora," he murmured, his voice a mixture of warning and plea. She should have recoiled. She should have remembered the differences between them, the social chasm that separated them, the unwritten rules that governed interactions between bosses and employees. But there was something in the way he said her name, something in the vulnerability in his eyes that made all those rational considerations disappear. Instead of recoiling, she moved closer. The first kiss was hesitant, almost accidental, as if both were testing if this was real or just a feverish dream brought on by the strangeness of the night. But when their lips met, when Vincent felt her softness against his firmness, when Aurora realized that he trembled as much as she did, the hesitation turned into need. Vincent pulled her to him with a desperation that surprised him. It was as if she were water, and he had spent his entire life in the desert. His hands tangled in her hair, and he kissed her as if he wanted to absorb her entire essence, her entire light, her entire capacity to see goodness where he only saw darkness. Aurora melted against him, her arms encircling his neck, her fingers exploring the texture of his hair. She had imagined her first kiss in 1,000 different ways, but never like this, never with such intensity, never with someone who seemed to understand her soul without her needing to explain her wounds. When they parted, both breathless, the reality of what had happened began to seep into their consciousnesses. But instead of embarrassment or regret, there was a sense of inevitability, as if that moment had been written in the stars long before either of them were born. "This is madness," Vincent said, but his hands remained on her face. "I know," Aurora whispered, "but I don't care." Outside, the storm roared with renewed fury, as if it approved the madness that was happening on the 48th floor. And in the laden silence that followed, two wounded hearts began to find healing in each other, even knowing that dawn would bring back a world that would never allow them to be together. Time seemed to have stopped in that office. Hours passed, but Vincent and Aurora barely noticed, lost in conversations that flowed as if they were old acquaintances reunited after years of separation. They talked about everything and nothing, about Aurora's grandmother who made homemade bread every morning, about Vincent's nightmares of empty corridors and voices calling him, about the books she read at the public library when she didn't have money to buy them, about the nights he walked alone through New York City trying to feel part of something. The storm continued outside, but within those four walls of glass and luxury, a bubble of intimacy had formed that neither of them wanted to burst. Vincent had taken off his jacket and loosened his tie. Aurora had set her shoes aside and tucked her legs onto the sofa. In the reddish gloom of the emergency lights, they looked like two completely different people from who they were during the day. "Have you ever been in love?" Vincent asked at some point in the early morning, the question arising naturally in the flow of conversation. Aurora blushed, grateful for the dim light that disguised her expression. "I thought I had. In my teens. He was a boy from school 2 years older. I wrote poems about him in a small notebook I hid under my mattress. And what happened? Nothing, really. He didn't even know I existed. I was very shy, very invisible. I've always been invisible." She fiddled with the hem of her uniform. "And you? Have you ever loved someone?" The question hit Vincent like a punch to the gut. He had had dozens of women, relationships that lasted weeks or months, always with clear rules, always with an expiration date. Love was a word he had crossed out of his vocabulary long ago. "No," he admitted. "I never allowed it. Love means handing over power over yourself to another person. It means giving them the ability to destroy you. I learned too early that people always leave. It's safer not to get attached." "What a sad life," Aurora murmured, no judgment in her voice, just a melancholy observation. "It was safe," Vincent corrected. "Until tonight." They looked at each other for a long moment. Something was changing in the air between them, a tension that wasn't uncomfortable, but intense, as if both were on the edge of a precipice and needed to decide whether to jump together or retreat to known ground. "Aurora," Vincent said her name like a prayer. "You know that when the sun rises, all this will seem like a dream, don't you?" She nodded, her eyes shining with a sadness that seemed ancient. "I know. You'll go back to being Mr. Del Valle, and I'll go back to being invisible. Cinderella, when the clock strikes midnight. What if I don't want you to be invisible?" The question hung in the air like a dangerous promise. Aurora felt her heart quicken. She had dreamed of this moment her whole life, of someone who would see her, who would want her, who would choose to stay. But she also knew that dreams and reality rarely coincided, especially for poor girls who fell in love with princes who lived in ivory towers. "Vincent," she began, but he approached, silencing her with a kiss that was different from the first. This one was urgent, necessary, as if both knew that time was running out and they needed to live a lifetime of intimacy in a few hours. His hands explored her face, her neck, and Aurora melted against him, allowing him to touch her with a reverence that made her feel precious for the first time in her life. There was no rush in his movements, but there was an intensity that spoke of years of loneliness being healed by another person's touch. "I never," she began to confess, but Vincent interrupted her with soft kisses on her neck. "I know," he murmured against her skin. "I can feel it. You are pure, Aurora. You are everything I never knew I needed." They made love right there on the leather sofa in Vincent's office, with the city asleep 48 floors below, and the storm was the soundtrack to their mutual surrender. It was Aurora's first time, and she gave herself with a trust that surprised them both, as if her body knew that this man would not harm her, that he would treat her as something sacred. Vincent, in turn, discovered that making love could be completely different from having sex. With Aurora, each touch, each kiss, each whisper was a prayer, a form of worship that he didn't know was possible. She looked at him with eyes that shone with tears of pleasure and emotion, and he felt for the first time in his adult life truly loved. Afterward, they remained entwined on the sofa, bodies sweaty and hearts beating in sync. Aurora rested her head on Vincent's chest, listening to the sound of his heartbeats that seemed to echo her own. His fingers traced invisible patterns on her bare back, as if he was trying to memorize every inch of her skin. "I don't want the dawn to break," she whispered. Vincent kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Neither do I. I wish we could stay here forever." What if we could? What if nothing else existed beyond this room, beyond this night? "It would be perfect," he replied, and for the first time in his life he truly believed in perfection. But like all perfect things, that night had an expiration date. The first rays of sun began to filter through the windows, tinging the sky pink and orange. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean and cruel morning in its clarity. It was the sound of the elevator coming back to life that brought them back to reality. The lights suddenly came on, dazzling them after hours in the gloom. The air conditioning started working again. The computers emitted their restart alerts, and the civilized world reclaimed its territory. Vincent pulled away from Aurora as if she had caught fire. The raw morning light revealed the reality of the situation. He, the billionaire CEO, naked on the sofa with a cleaning employee. She, the humble girl from the countryside, exposed and vulnerable before the most powerful man in her professional life. "Get dressed," he said abruptly, already pulling on his own clothes. The voice that had whispered words of love hours earlier now sounded cold, distant, professional. Aurora felt as if she had been slapped. She covered herself with her hands, desperately searching for her clothes as she tried to understand the sudden transformation. "Vincent?" "Mr. Del Valle," he corrected without looking at her. "You should call me Mr. Del Valle." The words were like knives. Aurora finished dressing in silence, her hands trembling as she buttoned the uniform that now seemed like a pathetic costume. The man who had loved her with such tenderness had disappeared, replaced by a cold and impersonal version she didn't recognize. "What happened to us?" she asked, her voice small. Vincent finally turned to her, and Aurora saw that his eyes had turned to ice. Nothing happened. It was an atypical night, an extraordinary situation, nothing more. "You don't believe that?" "I believe what is necessary to believe." He walked to the desk, assuming his executive posture. "What happened here cannot be repeated. You understand that, don't you?" Aurora felt tears burning her eyes, but refused to cry in front of him. There was dignity in her posture, even with her heart breaking. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Del Valle." "Good." He couldn't look directly at her. If he saw the hurt in her eyes, his resolve might crumble. "Security will escort you to the exit. Finish your shift normally." Aurora nodded and walked toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob and turned one last time. "You said your mother had no choice. But you do. You are choosing to be your father." The words hit Vincent like a lightning bolt, but he maintained his impassive expression until she left. Only when he was alone did he allow his shoulders to slump, for the pain to spread through his chest like liquid fire. He had done the right thing. He had protected both of them from an impossible situation. But why did he feel as if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life? Aurora descended the 48 floors with dry eyes and a burning chest. At the reception, a security guard waited for her, cordial but firm. She collected her belongings in the locker room, changed her clothes, and left the building where she had known paradise and hell on the same night. In the days that followed, Vincent plunged into work with a ferocity that impressed even his most dedicated employees. He arrived at the office before sunrise and only left after the streets emptied. He cancelled social engagements, rejected invitations, avoided any situation that might remind him of Aurora. But the memories were persistent. Her scent seemed to have permeated his office sofa, He replaced the furniture, then changed the entire decor, but he could still feel her presence in the corners, in the shadows, in the echo of her laughter that seemed to reverberate through the walls. Aurora, in turn, did not return to work the following week. On the third day of her absence, Vincent learned through HR that she had been reassigned to a smaller branch of the company in a distant borough, working different hours. Officially, it was an internal restructuring. In practice, it was an exile. He told himself it was better this way, that she would be safer away from him, away from the temptation she represented. But the nights became even more sleepless, and the days dragged on like eternities. A month later, Aurora resigned. There was no official explanation, just a dry document stating she would not return. Vincent read the communique 3 times, the words dancing before his eyes like incomprehensible hieroglyphs. She had disappeared from his life as suddenly as she had appeared. The months passed like a grey mist. Vincent functioned, made decisions, closed deals, but it was as if he was operating on autopilot. His employees noticed the change. He had become even more ruthless, even colder if that were possible. Meetings were sharp, deadlines impossible, tolerance for error absolute zero. He tried to return to old habits. He went out with some women, always the same type he used to choose, sophisticated, ambitious, emotionally distant. But every time he touched them, every time he kissed them, it was Aurora's face he saw behind closed eyelids. It was her skin his hands sought. It was her voice he wanted to hear whispering his name. The women noticed his distraction, his lack of genuine interest, and gradually stopped accepting his invitations. Vincent found himself alone again, but now it was a different, sharper loneliness, because he had tasted what it was like to have someone who truly knew him. He hired investigators to find her. Not to disturb her, he told himself, just to know if she was okay. But Aurora had disappeared completely, as if the earth had swallowed her. There was no trace of her in New York City, no registered address, no formal employment, no bank account that the investigators could track. It was as if she had become a ghost walking the streets of the metropolis, but she had existed. The proof was in his mother's letters that he now read religiously, looking for parallels between his story and Aurora's. It was in the dreams that visited him every night, dreams where she forgave him, where they were together again. It was in the way his heart quickened whenever he saw a dark-haired woman on the street, in the foolish hope that died every time he realized it wasn't her. 6 months after that night, Vincent had accepted that Aurora Menzies would be just a memory, a ghost that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had made his choice that morning. He had chosen the security of the known over the risk of the unknown. He had chosen to be his father. But the universe, as Vincent would soon discover, had different plans. It was on a cold September morning, 8 months and 3 weeks after the blackout, that Vincent received the call that would change everything again. He was reviewing reports when his secretary interrupted him. "Mr. Del Valle, there's a young woman at the reception asking to speak with you. She says it's urgent." Vincent didn't even lift his eyes from the papers. "Schedule a meeting for next week. You know I don't receive people without an appointment." "Sir," the secretary hesitated. She said her name. "Aurora Menzies." The world stopped. The report slipped from Vincent's hands, scattering across the floor like leaves in the wind. His heart beat so hard he was sure everyone in the building could hear it. "Bring her here," he managed to say, his voice coming out hoarse. "Sir, she appears to be pregnant." Vincent closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was as if he was seeing the world for the first time. Everything made sense now. Aurora's sudden disappearance, the complete silence, the impossibility of finding her. She was carrying his child. 10 minutes later, Aurora was standing at his office door, and Vincent felt the air escape his lungs. She was thinner, her face pale, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. And her belly, rounded under her simple dress, was living proof of that night he had tried to convince himself was just a dream. "Hello, Vincent," she said, and her voice had a different quality, more mature, as if she had aged years in months. "Aurora." The name came out as a whisper, like a prayer. They looked at each other for a moment that seemed eternal, 2 worlds reuniting after months of forced separation. There was so much to be said, so many questions to be asked, so much suffering to be explained. but Aurora cut through everything with the efficiency of a blade. "I was a virgin," she said, her voice steady. "That night was my first time, and this child is yours. I want nothing from you. I just needed you to know where he came from." Vincent felt as if he had been punched in the gut, not by the news of paternity, which he had already deduced, but by the way she spoke. There was no resentment in her voice, no anger, no expectation. There was just a wounded dignity that made him hate himself more than he ever had. "Aurora, No," she interrupted him. "Don't say anything. Don't apologize, don't try to explain, don't offer money. I only came here because I thought you had the right to know. Now you know. I can leave." She turned to leave, but Vincent found his voice. "Wait." Aurora stopped, but didn't turn around. How are you? Where are you living? Are you well?" For a moment, she seemed to falter as if her resolve was about to break. But when she finally turned, her eyes were dry. "I'm surviving, as I always have." And with those words she left, leaving Vincent alone with the overwhelming weight of what he had lost and what he was about to gain. A child. He was going to be a father, and the woman carrying his baby hated him, with every reason in the world. For the first time in his adult life, Vincent Del Valle truly cried, tears of regret that came too late to fix what he had broken, but perhaps still in time to build something new on the wreckage. Vincent couldn't work for the rest of the day. After Aurora left his office, he remained there, motionless, staring fixedly at the door through which she had disappeared. The revelation of the pregnancy had shaken all the foundations of his carefully controlled existence. He was going to be a father. There was a child growing inside the woman he had loved and rejected on the same night. The hours dragged on like eternities. Vincent cancelled all meetings, ignored calls, left emails unanswered. His mind was elsewhere, trying to process the enormity of what he had just discovered. Aurora was 9 months pregnant, which meant she had carried that secret alone all this time, dealing with the nausea, the fears, the body's transformations without support, without help, without anything but her own strength. And he had been responsible for it. Not just for getting her pregnant, but for abandoning her when she needed him most. In the late afternoon, Vincent made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. He would find her, talk to her, take responsibility, not just for the baby, but for Aurora, because she deserved more than the coldness with which he had treated her. But finding Aurora Menzies in New York City was like looking for a needle in a haystack. She had completely erased her tracks. There was no registered address, no formal employment, no bank account that investigators could trace. It was as if she had become a ghost walking the streets of the metropolis. It was 3 weeks of fruitless searching until Vincent had an idea. If Aurora was 9 months pregnant, she needed medical care. And considering her financial situation, she was probably being treated by the public health system. He mobilized his contacts in the state government, used his political influence, made strategic donations to public hospitals, all to gain access to the information he needed. It wasn't easy or quick or ethical, but Vincent was desperate. He needed to find her before it was too late. The answer arrived on a cold October morning. Aurora Menzies was being treated at City General Hospital in the high-risk obstetrics department. High risk. The words echoed in Vincent's mind like a death knell. Something was wrong with the pregnancy, something that put Aurora or the baby in danger. He arrived at the hospital in record time, leaving the driver in the parking lot as he ran through the corridors to the room where she was being treated. He hadn't thought about what he would say, hadn't prepared a speech. He just knew he needed to be there. That's when he bumped into him. Gabriel Stone was 32, with slightly disheveled brown hair and kind eyes behind discreet framed glasses. He wore the white coat of resident doctors and carried a clipboard with patient charts. When Vincent, in his haste, almost knocked him down in the corridor, Gabriel reacted with the characteristic patience of someone who dealt daily with anxious family members. "Excuse me," Vincent murmured, "trying to pass." "Are you looking for someone?" Gabriel asked, noticing the poorly disguised desperation on the elegantly dressed man's face. "Can I help?" Vincent hesitated. There was something in the young doctor's posture that inspired confidence, a serenity that contrasted with the tension he himself felt. "Aurora Menzies. I'm looking for Aurora Menzies." Gabriel frowned. "Aurora is in consultation at the moment. Are you? I am. Vincent stopped. What was he? The baby's father? The man who had abandoned her? The coward who had chosen security over love? I am the child's father. Gabriel's expression changed immediately. There was no judgment in his eyes, but Vincent noticed a subtle shift, as if the doctor was re-evaluating the situation. I understand, Gabriel said carefully. You know that Aurora is 37 weeks, correct? And that there are some complications we are monitoring. Vincent's heart turned to ice. What kind of complications? Gabriel looked around, ensuring no one else was listening. Let's talk in my office. Aurora will be fine, but there are some things you need to know. Gabriel's office was small and functional, with only a desk, 2 chairs, and an old computer. On the walls, diplomas and certificates competed for space with children's drawings that grateful patients had given him over the years. Vincent sat in the indicated chair, his hands sweating from nervousness. First, Gabriel began, I want you to know that Aurora is one of the bravest women I've ever met. She arrived here 3 months ago, alone, scared, but determined to do everything right for the child. She never complained, always followed all medical instructions, even when she didn't have money for the medicine. Guilt hit Vincent like a tidal wave. While he lived in his luxury penthouse, Aurora was struggling, fighting alone to take care of herself and the baby. The complications, Vincent forced himself to ask. The baby has a congenital heart condition called tetralogy of Fallot. It's a complex malformation but operable. With surgery, children can lead completely normal lives. Without surgery, Gabriel didn't need to finish the sentence. Vincent felt the world spin around him. Tetralogy of Fallot, the same heart problem he had had when he was born, the same condition that had almost killed him in the first months of his life, which had required multiple surgeries and years of intensive care. His son had inherited not only his eyes but also his fragility. When is he due? Vincent asked, his voice hoarse. Any moment now. Aurora has been having irregular contractions for 2 days. We're monitoring, but I believe labor will start soon. Gabriel observed Vincent carefully. May I ask where you've been during these 9 months? The question was asked without aggression, but Vincent felt as if he were being judged by a court, and he deserved to be judged. I was an idiot, he admitted. I was scared. I thought I was protecting both of them, but I was just being a coward. Gabriel nodded slowly. Aurora never spoke ill of you. When we asked about the baby's father, she just said he didn't know about the pregnancy. She protected you even when she was alone and scared. Gabriel's words were like daggers in Vincent's heart. Aurora had kept his secret, had protected his reputation even when he didn't deserve any protection. I want to see her, Vincent said. I want to take responsibility. It's not my place to decide that, Gabriel replied, but I can tell you that Aurora will need a lot of support in the coming weeks. The baby's surgery will be complex, expensive, and she'll need to take time off work. Work? She's working. Gabriel seemed surprised. Of course. She works in an industrial laundry night shift. It's not ideal for a pregnant woman at the end of her pregnancy, but she needs the money. He paused. You really didn't know any of this? Vincent shook his head, feeling smaller and smaller. Aurora was working in a laundry, probably carrying heavy loads, breathing chemical fumes, exerting physical effort, all while carrying a baby with heart problems. She had done this for months alone while he sank into self-pity in his ivory tower. I want to help, Vincent said. I want to pay for the surgery, the medical care, everything she needs. Gabriel observed him for a long moment. May I ask why it took you so long to show up? Vincent didn't have an answer that wouldn't make him seem even more despicable. Because I'm a coward. Because I'm afraid to love and be abandoned again. Because I thought it was easier to pretend nothing had happened. And now I want to do the right thing. Even if it's too late, Gabriel stood up. I'll speak with Aurora. If she agrees to see you, I'll let you know. But Vincent, he used his first name purposefully, she's been through a lot of suffering. Be gentle, be honest, and be patient. She has no reason to trust you. Vincent nodded, knowing that Gabriel was right. He had broken Aurora's trust in the worst possible way, at the moment she was most vulnerable. Regaining that trust would be a long and painful process. Gabriel returned 40 minutes later with an expression Vincent couldn't decipher. She agrees to see you. But there are conditions. Gabriel crossed his arms. 15 minutes only. No pressure, no promises you can't keep, no drama. She's exhausted and doesn't need more stress. Vincent agreed to everything. 15 minutes were more than he deserved. Aurora was lying in a hospital bed, connected to monitors tracking the baby's heartbeats. She looked even more fragile than when she had appeared in his office, thinner except for her prominent belly. But her eyes, when they met Vincent's, still had that fierce determination he had admired since the first night. "Hello," she said simply. "Hello." Vincent approached slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might flee at any moment. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, scared, but okay." She touched her belly instinctively. "Gabriel said you want to help." Vincent pulled a chair close to the bed. "I want to take full responsibility. The surgery, the medical care, everything. And I want you to no longer have to work in that laundry." Aurora looked at him with an indecipherable expression. "Why?" The simple question caught him off guard. "Because he's my son too. Because you shouldn't be going through this alone. Where were you 3 months ago when I fainted at work because I hadn't eaten properly? Where were you 2 months ago when I cried alone because I didn't know if I'd have money for the tests? Where were you last week when I found out my son might die if he doesn't get the surgery?" Each question was a slap. Vincent lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. "I was being a coward," he admitted. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of me. Of taking responsibility." "Of what exactly?" Vincent forced himself to look at her. "Scared of loving you and being abandoned again. Scared of not being a good father. Scared of messing everything up like my father messed up." Aurora was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but still wounded. "Do you know what the hardest part of all this was? It wasn't the nausea or the lack of money or the fear of the surgery. It was explaining to myself why the man who said he loved me abandoned me the next morning. It was trying to understand if I had imagined it all, if it had just been sex for you, if I was that insignificant." Vincent felt tears burn his eyes. "Aurora, nothing that happened between us was insignificant. That night changed my life. But not enough for you to stay. I was trying to protect you." A lie. The word came out like a shot. "You were protecting yourself. Don't use me as an excuse for your cowardice." Vincent leaned forward, the weight of the truth crushing his shoulders. "You're right. I was selfish, cowardly, cruel. I have no excuses. But I'm here now and I want to do the right thing. The right thing would have been to stay." Aurora closed her eyes as if she was fighting against the pain. "But it's over. Now all I care about is that my son is okay." "Our son," Vincent gently corrected. Aurora looked at him firmly. "My son. You lost the right to call him yours when you abandoned me." The words were like a punch to the gut, but Vincent knew she was right. He had lost much more than he realized. It was at that moment that Gabriel entered the room, checking the monitors with the efficiency of someone who had done it thousands of times. "How are the contractions?" he asked Aurora, completely ignoring Vincent. "Stronger," she replied. "And more frequent." Gabriel frowned, observing the data on the monitors. "I think it's time. I'll call the team." Vincent felt panic take over him. "Now, but it's still early, isn't it?" 37 weeks is considered full term, Gabriel explained, but Vincent noticed the poorly disguised concern in his voice. Given the baby's heart problem, it's better for him to be born in a controlled hospital environment. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Aurora was taken to the delivery room. Vincent was relegated to the waiting room, and Gabriel disappeared behind doors that seemed to hold all the secrets of the universe. Vincent walked around the waiting room like a caged animal. He had called the best doctors in New York City, offered any amount necessary, mobilized all his resources, but in the end everything was out of his control. He who had spent his entire life controlling every variable, every outcome was completely powerless. It was 6 hours of torture before Gabriel appeared, still wearing surgical scrubs, his face tired but relieved. "It's a boy," he announced. "Small but strong. The heart surgery will be necessary, but not immediately. He's stable." Vincent felt his knees buckle. "And Aurora?" "Well, tired but well. It was a difficult birth, but she's a warrior." "Can I see them?" Gabriel hesitated. "Aurora is sleeping. And as for the baby, he's in the NICU. Only direct family members can enter." Vincent understood the implicit message. In the eyes of the hospital, in the eyes of the law, in Aurora's eyes, he was not family. He was just a stranger who had shown up at the last minute. "But," Gabriel continued, "if Aurora agrees, I can take you to see him through the glass." Vincent nodded gratefully. It was more than he deserved. The NICU was an aseptic and silent environment, full of incubators that looked like space capsules. Gabriel guided him to one in the corner, where a tiny baby slept surrounded by wires and monitors. Vincent looked at his son for the first time and felt the world stop. The baby was perfect, despite being small, with delicate features that were a harmonious blend of him and Aurora. He had her determined chin and his long hands. Even sleeping, there was a serenity on his face that reminded Vincent of the peace he had felt on that stormy night. "What will she name him?" Vincent asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. "Michael," Gabriel replied. "Aurora said it means who is like God. She wants him to be strong, to be a warrior." Michael. Vincent repeated the name mentally, savoring each syllable. His son's name was Michael. "Gabriel," Vincent said, still looking at the baby. "Can I ask a personal question?" "Of course." "You like her?" It wasn't a question. It was an observation. Vincent had seen the way Gabriel looked at Aurora, the kindness in his voice when he spoke of her, the extra care he showed. Gabriel didn't deny it. "Aurora is a special woman, strong, courageous, kind. Any man would be lucky to have her. But you know she still has feelings for me." Gabriel turned to face him. "I know, and that's why I never made a move. Aurora needs to resolve her issues with you before she can move on. But Vincent," he paused, "if you hurt her again, you'll have to deal with me." Vincent nodded, respecting the young doctor's honesty. Gabriel was everything he wasn't: kind, present, reliable. He was the kind of man Aurora deserved, the kind of man who would stay when things got tough. "She deserves someone better than me," Vincent admitted. "Yes," Gabriel agreed without hesitation. "But sometimes it's not about deserving. Sometimes it's about love, even when that love is complicated and painful." Vincent continued looking at Michael for a few more minutes, memorizing every detail of his face. His son, he had a son, and no matter what happened between him and Aurora, he wouldn't abandon this child. He wouldn't repeat his father's mistakes. When he finally left the hospital, it was already 4 in the morning. New York City was silent, as if the entire city was holding its breath. Vincent sat in the back seat of his car, but gave no instructions to the driver. He needed time to process everything that had happened. He was a father. He had a son who would need heart surgery, special care, unconditional love. And the woman who had given birth to this baby hated him, with every reason in the world. But there was something Gabriel had said that echoed in his mind. Sometimes it's not about deserving. Perhaps Vincent didn't deserve a second chance with Aurora. Perhaps he didn't deserve her love or forgiveness or the opportunity to be a father. But perhaps he could earn those things. Perhaps he could show that he had changed, that he was capable of staying, of fighting, of loving without fear. It wouldn't be easy. Aurora had built walls around her heart, walls he himself had helped build. Gabriel was there, offering the kind of stable and secure love she deserved. And Vincent was still fighting his own demons, against decades of emotional conditioning that told him loving was surrendering to suffering. But for the first time in his life, Vincent Del Valle was willing to fight for something more important than money or power. He was willing to fight for love, even if it meant facing his greatest fears, even if it meant admitting his weaknesses, even if it meant the possibility of being rejected again. Because now there was Michael, and Aurora, and the remote, but real, chance to build a family on the ruins of their broken hearts. "Home," he finally told the driver. But for the first time in years, Vincent wasn't entirely sure where his home was. 3 days later, Vincent received a call that would change everything again. It wasn't from Gabriel or the hospital. It was from Roderick Vance, one of the minority shareholders of the Del Valle Corporation, a man Vincent had always suspected but had never been able to prove anything against. "Vincent, my friend," Roderick's syrupy voice echoed over the phone. "I hear you've become a daddy. Congratulations." Vincent froze. He had been extremely discreet about the situation, had instructed everyone involved to maintain absolute secrecy. How had Roderick found out? What are you talking about, Roderick? Oh, Vincent, don't be modest. Aurora Menzies, isn't it? The former cleaning employee who now has your baby? It's an interesting story. The implicit threat was clear. Vincent clenched his fists, trying to control his anger. What do you want? I want to help, of course. I have a proposal that can solve all your problems, a proposal that Miss Menzies might find very attractive. Vincent hung up the phone, but the damage was done. Roderick had found out about Aurora, and Michael and men like Roderick didn't discover secrets to keep them. They used them as weapons, and Vincent had the terrible feeling that the war to come would be much more brutal than anything he had faced in business. Aurora and Michael were in danger, and it was all his fault. The proposal arrived 3 days after Michael's birth, delivered by a man in a dark suit who appeared at the door of the hospital room where Aurora was trying to breastfeed her son between the respiratory physiotherapy sessions the baby needed. The envelope was thick, expensive, with the golden seal of a law firm that Aurora didn't recognize. Inside, there were documents she had to read 3 times to fully understand. It was an offer of emigration, a new passport, a clean identity, a house in a small town in rural Canada, a bank account with enough money for her and Michael to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. All she needed to do was sign the papers and disappear forever from Vincent Del Valle's life. The letter accompanying the documents was signed by Roderick Vance, and it made no bones about it. It explained that the presence of Aurora and the child represented a reputational risk for the Del Valle Corporation, that international investors might question the stability of Vincent's leadership if they knew of his indiscretion with a cleaning employee. The offer was generous, but the deadline was short, 48 hours to decide. Aurora held the papers with trembling hands, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. For days she had debated between the anger she felt for Vincent and the secret hope that he might be different this time. She had seen the genuine pain in his eyes when he looked at Michael. She had noticed something changing in him. But perhaps it had been just an illusion, just the desperate desire to believe that the man she had fallen in love with still existed somewhere behind the cold mask of the businessman. Now, looking at that $1 million proposal, Aurora wondered if Vincent knew what was happening, if he had authorized that, if he was behind the offer. Because if he was, it meant that he really saw her only as a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be removed with money. Gabriel entered the room at that moment, carrying the results of Michael's latest tests, and found Aurora crying silently over the documents scattered on her bed. Aurora? What happened? She handed him the papers without being able to speak. Gabriel read quickly, his expression growing darker with each line. This is absurd, he said finally. They can't do this. They can't try to buy you off to disappear. They can, Aurora whispered. And it's working. For a moment, I almost considered accepting. Gabriel sat on the edge of the bed, studying her face with attention. Why? Because I'm tired, Gabriel. I'm tired of fighting alone, of worrying if I'll have money for Michael's medicine, of working double shifts while he's in the NICU. I'm tired of loving a man who will never be able to love me back the way I need. Vincent doesn't know this, Gabriel said with certainty. I saw him with you, Aurora. I saw how he looks at you. That man didn't authorize this proposal. Aurora shook her head. How can you be so sure? Because I recognize a man in love when I see one, and I recognize a repentant man too. Vincent made terrible mistakes, but he loves you. In his complicated and emotionally damaged way, he loves you. Gabriel's words brought more tears to Aurora's eyes. Even if that's true, love isn't enough, Gabriel. Love doesn't pay bills, it doesn't guarantee stability. It doesn't protect me from being hurt again. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, observing Michael sleeping in the bassinet beside the bed. The baby was stronger every day. The monitors showed that his small, imperfect heart was fighting bravely. You know what I would do if I were you, Gabriel said finally. What? I'd show these documents to Vincent. I'd give him a chance to explain, to fight for you. Because if he really authorized this, you'll have your definitive answer. But if he didn't authorize it, Gabriel shrugged, maybe it's worth finding out what he's capable of when he's afraid of losing everything. Aurora looked at the documents again. 48 hours. It was enough time for one last conversation, one last chance to find out if the man who had surrendered to her on that stormy night still existed somewhere. But when she arrived at the Del Valle Corporation the next day, with Michael sleeping in her lap and the documents folded in her bag, she discovered that Vincent had traveled to London for an emergency meeting that would last at least a week. His secretary was polite but firm. There was no way to contact him, no way to reschedule, no exceptions. Aurora left the building feeling defeated. She had only 24 hours left to make her decision, and Vincent wasn't even in the country. Perhaps it was a sign. Perhaps the universe was trying to tell her it was time to accept reality and move on. It was Gabriel who finally discovered the truth about Vincent's trip. A call to a friend who worked at the international airport revealed that Vincent Del Valle had not boarded any international flight in the last 5 days. If he was in London, he had gotten there by other means. Or more likely, he wasn't in London at all. "Someone is lying to you," Gabriel told Aurora over the phone. "And I have a suspicion of who it might be." Roderick Vance received Aurora in his office with the false cordiality of a snake offering an apple. He was a man in his 50s, with perfectly combed grey hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His office was a smaller and more pretentious version of Vincent's, filled with expensive objects that screamed his wealth to anyone who entered. "Miss Menzies, what a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "And this must be little Michael, a beautiful baby." Aurora kept Michael close to her chest, her maternal instincts on alert. There was something about Roderick that made her feel like a gazelle in the presence of a predator. "I came to return this," she said, placing the envelope on the desk. "I don't accept your proposal." Roderick feigned surprise. "Oh, what a shame. It's really a very generous offer. I was sure an intelligent young woman like you would see the advantages." "Where is Vincent?" Aurora asked directly. "In London, as you've been informed. Very important meetings with international investors." Roderick smiled. "Coincidentally, these same investors are very concerned about certain instabilities in the company's leadership." "What kind of instabilities?" Roderick opened a folder and spread photographs across the table. They were photos of Aurora entering and leaving the hospital, of Vincent in the maternity ward corridor, of the moment he looked at Michael through the NICU glass. Photographs taken from afar with a telephoto lens by someone who had been observing their every move. The kind of instability that arises when the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation has an illegitimate child with a former cleaning employee, Roderick said casually. The kind that makes investors question the judgment and emotional stability of their business partners. Aurora felt nausea rising in her throat. "You are blackmailing Vincent. I am protecting the company's interests. Vincent is emotionally compromised. He's not making rational decisions. Shareholders are concerned. And you offered to solve the problem." "Exactly." Roderick leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "My proposal still stands, Miss Menzies. A new life in Canada, away from all this complication. Vincent can continue running the company without distractions. You and your son can live comfortably. Everyone wins." Aurora looked at the photographs again. In one of them, Vincent was holding his chin in his hands, his face contorted in an expression of pain that she intimately recognized. It was the same expression he had had that morning after the storm, when reality had imposed itself between them like an insurmountable wall. "What if I refuse again?" Roderick shrugged. "Well, the photographs might end up in the press. Gossip about the Del Valle CEO and his former cleaning employee mistress can be very damaging to business. And, of course, there's always the possibility that Vincent loses control of the company if shareholders lose confidence in him." The threat was clear. Aurora felt anger boiling in her chest, but also fear. Fear for Vincent, for Michael, for everything that could be destroyed by the greed and ambition of that man. "How much time do I have to decide?" 24 hours, Roderick said. "After that, I'll start implementing other solutions to the problem." Aurora left Roderick's office feeling as if she had been run over by a truck. The blackmail was real, the threats were concrete, and Vincent didn't even know what was happening. Or he knew and had chosen to hide instead of facing the situation. She spent the entire afternoon trying to find a way to contact Vincent, but all attempts were blocked. His secretary repeated the same story. He was in London, incommunicado, would return next week. Aurora's frustration grew with each hour, mixed with a growing feeling that she was alone again, as she always had been. It was Gabriel who finally discovered where Vincent really was. "He's at the family estate in the Hamptons," Gabriel said, appearing in Aurora's room in the late afternoon. "I got the information through a friend who works at their security company. Vincent has been there for 3 days alone." Aurora frowned. "But why would he lie about where he was?" "I don't know. But I have a theory." Gabriel sat beside her. "I think Vincent found out about the blackmail. I think Roderick made him the same offer. You disappear or he loses everything. And instead of fighting, Vincent did what he always does when he's scared. He ran." The revelation hit Aurora like a punch to the gut. If Gabriel was right, it meant that Vincent had chosen again to protect himself instead of fighting for her. It meant that even with Michael, even with everything that had happened between them, he still couldn't put love above fear. "I need to see him," Aurora said suddenly. "I need to hear him say it. I need him to look me in the eyes and tell me he chooses the company over us." Gabriel hesitated. "Aurora, the Hamptons is 2 hours from here, and you just had a baby. Michael still needs special care. Then come with me. You're a doctor. You can take care of Michael during the trip. Please, Gabriel. I need to do this. I need a definitive answer before making any decision." Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, seeing the determination in her eyes. It was the same determination she had shown throughout her pregnancy, during the difficult birth, during all the adversities she had faced alone. "All right," he said finally, "but on one condition. If Vincent hurts you again, promise me you'll accept that he's not worth it and you'll move on, without looking back." Aurora nodded, although she knew it would be easier to promise than to keep. "I promise." The Del Valle family estate in the Hamptons was an imposing stone and wood construction, nestled among centuries-old pine trees on a property that seemed to stretch to the horizon. It was the kind of place where generations of powerful men had retreated to mourn their losses and plan their revenges, away from the curious eyes of the world. Vincent was in the library when he heard the sound of the car approaching. He had spent the last 3 days there, drinking whiskey and rereading his mother's letters, trying to find the courage to do what needed to be done. Roderick's proposal had been clear. Aurora and Michael disappeared, or Vincent lost everything: the company, the fortune, the reputation it had taken a lifetime to build. But when he saw Aurora get out of the car with Michael in her arms, followed by Gabriel, Vincent felt as if the world had stopped spinning. She had found him. She had come to him despite everything. He opened the door before she could knock, and they stared at each other in silence for a moment that seemed eternal. Aurora was pale, with deep circles under her eyes, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes that he recognized and feared. "We need to talk," she said simply. Vincent nodded and led them into the living room, where a fireplace crackled cheerfully, creating an atmosphere of domestic comfort that contrasted with the tension in the air. Gabriel offered to take care of Michael in another room, leaving them alone for the first time since that terrible morning after the storm. "I received an interesting proposal yesterday," Aurora began, taking the documents from her bag. "Someone wants to pay me a lot of money to disappear from your life forever." Vincent closed his eyes, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. "Aurora, the question is, did you know about this? Are you behind this offer?" "No," he replied immediately. "Roderick acted on his own, but..." Vincent walked to the window, observing the mountains shrouded in mist. "But maybe he's right. Maybe it's better for everyone if you accept." Aurora felt as if she had been slapped. "How can you say that?" "Because I'm going to ruin your life, Aurora." Vincent turned to her, his eyes shining with a mixture of pain and despair. "I always ruin everything I touch. My mother tried to love me and was cast out. My father tried to teach me to be strong and created a monster. You tried to show me what true love is, and I abandoned you when you needed me most." "Vincent, no. Let me finish." He approached her but stopped at a safe distance, as if he were afraid to contaminate her with his presence. "Roderick is right about one thing. I am emotionally unstable. I don't know how to love without hurting. I don't know how to stay without running away. Michael deserves a better father, and you deserve a better man." Aurora watched him for a long moment, seeing beyond the pain and fear to the man who had surrendered to her on that stormy night. "Are you finished?" Vincent nodded, confused by the calm in her voice. "Good, because now it's my turn to speak." Aurora stood up, walking until she was right in front of him. "You're right about one thing. You are emotionally damaged. But you know what? So am I. I was abandoned by my mother, raised myself, spent my entire life feeling invisible and worthless. We are both broken people, Vincent. The difference is that I'm willing to try to fix myself. How you just want to run." Vincent opened his mouth to protest, but she continued. "You say you don't know how to love without hurting? Then learn. You say you don't know how to stay without running away? Then practice, because love isn't a feeling you either have or don't have, Vincent. It's a choice you make every day, and you've been choosing fear. Aurora, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that you're afraid I'll leave like your mother did. I understand that you're terrified of the possibility of not being a good father. I understand that the idea of losing control frightens you. But you know what else I understand?" She touched his face softly. "I understand that you love me, and that I love you too. And that love is worth the risk." Vincent felt tears burning his eyes. "What if I disappoint you again? Then you disappoint me. And we talk about it. And we try again. That's how relationships work, Vincent. They're not business contracts with performance clauses. They're acts of faith, but Roderick is a problem we'll solve together. Because that's what people who love each other do. They face problems together." Vincent looked into her eyes and saw something he had lost a long time ago. Hope. Not the blind hope of youth, but the mature hope of someone who knows pain and chooses to believe in the possibility of joy nonetheless. "I love you," he whispered. "God, how I love you. But I'm so scared." "I know. I'm scared too. But I won't let fear decide my life for me. And I won't let you either." Vincent pulled her to him then, kissing her with the desperation of a man who had been lost in the desert and finally found water. Aurora melted against him, feeling as if she had finally come home after a long and painful journey. When they parted, both were crying. "What do we do about Roderick?" Vincent asked. Aurora smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile that reminded Vincent why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. "We fight. Together." The confrontation with Roderick happened the following Monday in the 48th floor boardroom of the Del Valle Corporation. Vincent had called an emergency meeting with all major shareholders, including Roderick, who arrived confident and smiling, without imagining what awaited him. Aurora was there too, sitting beside Vincent, with Michael sleeping peacefully in her lap. Her presence caused murmurs among the shareholders, but Vincent called for silence with an authoritative gesture. "Gentlemen," Vincent began, "I have called this meeting to discuss some serious irregularities that have recently been discovered." Roderick frowned. "What kind of irregularities?" Vincent smiled, but it was a cold smile. "Blackmail, threats, attempted manipulation of shareholders through false information." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this." Vincent placed a recorder in the center of the table and pressed play. Roderick's voice echoed through the room, clear as crystal, offering Aurora money to disappear, threatening Vincent with the loss of the company if he didn't distance himself from her. There were also recordings of conversations Roderick had had with other shareholders, spreading rumors about Vincent's emotional instability, trying to undermine his leadership. Roderick's face gradually paled as the recording continued. Where did you get that?" "Aurora recorded your conversation with you," Vincent explained calmly. "And we hired investigators to find out what other sabotage attempts you had made. It was a surprise to discover you had been attempting a coup for months." Gabriel had been the one to suggest recording the conversation with Roderick, a precaution that had proven invaluable. With the evidence in hand, Vincent had garnered full support from the other shareholders, who quickly distanced themselves from Roderick when they realized the extent of his manipulations. This is a setup," Roderick stammered. "It's evidence," one of the older shareholders said dryly. "And I propose that Roderick Vance be immediately removed from all positions in the corporation." The vote was unanimous. Roderick was escorted out of the building by security guards, his attempts to protest ignored by everyone present. His influence in the company had ended, and with it his ability to threaten Vincent and Aurora. After all the shareholders left, Vincent and Aurora remained alone in the boardroom. The silence was broken only by the small sounds Michael made in his sleep. "It's over," Vincent said, barely able to believe it. "It's over." Aurora agreed. Vincent knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Aurora, I know I've made terrible mistakes. I know I've hurt you in ways I may never be able to fully mend. But I want to try. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to become the man you and Michael deserve." Aurora smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Vincent, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to stay, to choose to stay every day, even when it's hard." "I choose to stay," he said without hesitation. "I choose you both. I choose love. Even with all the fear, even with all the uncertainties, I choose to try." Aurora leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that sealed the promise they were both making. To fight for their love, to build a family on the ruins of their broken hearts, to choose hope instead of fear. 6 months later, Michael was strong and healthy after a successful heart surgery. The boy had become the center of Vincent's universe, who had discovered that fatherhood was both the most terrifying and most wonderful thing he had ever experienced. Aurora had moved into Vincent's penthouse, but they had renovated the space to make it a real home, not just a monument to professional success. There were family photos on the walls, toys scattered on the floor, and the sound of laughter echoing through the corridors that had once known only silence. Gabriel had become a dear family friend, Michael's pediatrician, and eventually the boy's godfather. He had found love of his own with a hospital nurse, a kind woman who appreciated his goodness and dedication. Vincent still had nightmares sometimes, moments of panic when the fear of abandonment threatened to consume him. But Aurora was always there, reminding him that love wasn't about guarantees but about daily choices. And every day Vincent chose to stay. They married in a small, intimate ceremony with only their closest friends and Michael, who slept peacefully throughout the celebration. Vincent had asked Aurora if she wanted a grand party, but she had preferred something simple, focused on what truly mattered, the family they had created together. On their wedding night, as they watched Michael sleep in his crib, Vincent took Aurora's hand and intertwined his fingers with hers. "Do you think we'll make it?" he asked softly. Aurora smiled, remembering the similar question he had asked that first night in the storm. "I think we already have. We created life from pain, love from fear. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is." Vincent kissed her hand, a simple gesture that carried decades of future promises. "I love you, Aurora Menzies del Valle. And I love you, Vincent, forever." Outside, New York City continued its nocturnal symphony, a city that never slept, full of people seeking their own miracles. But inside that penthouse, a family had found something rare and precious, a love that had survived the storm and had chosen to bloom in the sun. And as Michael slept peacefully between them, Vincent and Aurora knew that they had built something stronger than fear, more lasting than pain, more powerful than all the forces that had tried to separate them. They had built a home. Finally, they had built a home,